Today, in our study of Job, we're picking up with chapter 11. Job has already defended his case against his first two friends, Eliphaz and Bildad. Now, after Job has rebuffed Bildad, his third so-called friend, Zophar, speaks up. And in chapter 11, Zophar, the Naamathite, gets a little testy with Job. He begins in verse 2, and he says to Job, "Are all these words to go unanswered?" Basically, Job, your argument stinks, and I can't stay silent. I have to respond. He says, "Is this talk of yours to be validated? Will your idle talk reduce men to silence?" There are certain questions in the Bible that are written in a specific way that give the direct answer that question expects. So when Zophar asks in verse 3, "Will you reduce men to be silent?" the expected answer is no. "Will no one rebuke you when you mock us?" So now Zophar is the rebuker of Job. He goes on in verse 4, he says, "You say to God, my beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight." Now Zophar upholds the teachings of the book of Proverbs. He buys into what we call retribution theology. That means God punishes the wicked and God rewards the righteous. So in Zophar's eyes, if Job was indeed flawless, as Job has been arguing, then God would not have inflicted Job with such heinous suffering. But because Job is in pain and has experienced such personal loss, Job must have done something wrong. In verse 5, Zophar continues, "Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you, Job, and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom. For true wisdom has two sides, and know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin." Zophar believes that God in his mercy forgives sin. This is a very basic and fundamental Christian belief. The problem, again, with Zophar is the same problem that Eliphaz has. Zophar thinks he is sharing God's wisdom, but he is doing so in the wrong context. True wisdom is not just knowledge of God's wisdom, knowledge of God's mysteries. True wisdom is knowing when to apply a correct proverb to a correct situation. So even though Zophar thinks that Job has sinned, he says to Job, "Look, God is merciful. God could have done far worse to you because of your sin." And then he asks in verse 7, "Can you fathom the mysteries of God? Can you probe the limits of the Almighty?" Again, Zophar thinks God's mysteries are beyond Job. He thinks, like some of the Gnostics thought, that God only reveals his wisdom and his mysteries to a select few. Zophar must believe that he is one of those few. Ironically, Job all along has been arguing that he does not understand the mysteries of God, that he cannot, as a mere mortal, fathom the ways God works. Zophar continues, "The ways of God are higher than the heavens. So what can you do, Job? They are deeper than the depths of the grave. So what can you know, Job? Their measure is longer than the earth and wider than the sea. So if God comes along and confines you to prison and convenes a court, who can oppose him?" Again, ironically, this is exactly the argument Job has been making. He cannot oppose God. God will simply overpower him. Zophar says in verse 11, "Surely he recognizes deceitful men." In other words, Job, God recognized you are a wicked sinner. "And when he sees evil, does he not take note?" Well, since you're suffering, Job, God must have taken note. I love verse 12. He says, "A witless man can no more become wise than a wild donkey's coat can be born to a man." We have a modern day saying, "When pigs fly." Basically, Zophar says, Job, you will become wise when pigs fly. In other words, never. He asks, "If you devote your heart to God and you stretch out your hands to him, if you put away sin that is in your hand and allow no evil to dwell in your tent, then you will lift up your face without shame. You will stand firm and without fear. Do right, and you will be upright. Follow the ways of God, and you will remain standing. You will surely forget your trouble, recalling it only as water gone by. Life will be brighter than noonday, and darkness will become like morning. You will be secure because there is hope. You will look about you and take your rest in safety." According to Zophar, hope can only come to those who truly repent of their sins. However, Job maintains that he is blameless and has no need to change his mind, change the way he thinks, change the way he behaves, i.e., repent. Zophar concludes, "You will lie down and no one will make you afraid, and many will court your favor. But the eyes of the wicked will fall, and escape will elude them. Their hope will become like a dying gasp." Remember, since chapter 3 to this point, what has Job wanted to do? Job has wanted to die, to return to nothingness, where he does not feel the terrors of God, where he is not afraid, where he is not in pain or suffering, where he feels absolutely nothing because he is nothing. Zophar concludes that only the wicked would want such a thing. Job now replies to Zophar. In chapter 12, he begins, "Doubtless you are the people, and wisdom will die with you." Job is being sarcastic with his so-called friend. He goes, "I have a mind as well as you. Who does not know all these things? I have become a laughing stock to my friends. Though I call upon God, and even if he answered me, I'm still a laughing stock, though righteousness and blameless. You guys are making fun of my suffering. Is that true wisdom? That's what Job wants his friends to realize. They're not being comforting friends. They're not being helpful. They're pointing the finger. They're blaming him. They're telling him how bad he is, how wicked he is. And Job wants to know, is that what wisdom really is? If so, let that wisdom die with them. He goes on, he says, men at ease have contempt for misfortune, as the fate of those whose feet are slippery. He says, nothing has happened to you guys, and so of course you feel contempt for those who are suffering. The tents of marauders are undisturbed, and those who provoke God are secure, those who carry their God in their hands. Job says to his friends, you are no different than a band of thieves. You're no different from blasphemers who think that you're carrying around God within your own little box of understanding. God does not fit our boxes. Then Job goes on to ask the animals and they will teach you, or the birds of the air and they will teach you, or speak to the earth and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you. Which of these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done all of this? So basically, ask the dogs that are licking my sores. They know God has inflicted this suffering upon me. For in his hand the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind is found. So does not the ear test words and the tongue taste food? Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding? In other words, what we experience throughout our lives influences how we understand ourselves, our surroundings, and how we relate to God. So experience will influence and oftentimes change theology. In verse 13, Job asks, to God belongs wisdom and power. Are not counsel and understanding his? That's why Job can't do anything to defend his case, because wisdom and counsel belong to God, and God has not given that wisdom and counsel to Job to understand why all of this is happening to him. What he tears down, cannot he rebuild? The man he imprisons, cannot he release? Unfortunately, God hasn't done that for Job. If he holds back the waters, there is drought. If he lets them loose, they devastate the land. To him belongs strength and victory. Both deceived and deceiver are his. Now that's a very ecclesiastic approach to one's relationship to God. That both the good and the bad belong to God. Both those who deceive and those who are being deceived still belong to God. He leads counselors away stripped and makes fools of judges. He takes off the shackles put on by kings and ties a loincloth around their waist. He leads priests away stripped and overthrows men long established. He silences the lips of trusted advisors and takes away the discernment of elders. He pours contempt on nobles and disarms the mighty. He reveals the deep things of darkness and brings deep shadows into light. He makes nations great and destroys them. He enlarges nations and despises them. He deprives the leaders of the earth of their reason. He sends them wandering through a trackless waste. They grope in darkness with no light, and he makes them stagger like drunkards. And all of this, Job is expressing that oftentimes God will do what we call a role reversal. He will change the fate of people from good to bad, from bad to good, from up to down, from down to up, from left to right, from right to left. Even Jesus himself often implied the same understanding when he said that the first will be last and the last will be first. And how many times throughout the Bible does God choose the weaker to be his instrument of power? And does he despise the powerful, humbling them by rebuking them? How many times does God throughout the Old Testament choose the younger son to become the heir of his kingdom instead of following through with the traditional order that the oldest son would inherit such a blessing? So God is often showing that he opposes the proud, lifts up the humble. But when he lifts up the humble, oftentimes they become proud, therefore they are brought low again. So Job is saying, all of this God does. Who can really know what's going to happen next? Only God. And Job says in the beginning of chapter 13, my eyes have seen all of this. I've experienced all of that. My ears have heard it, and I understand. What you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you, Zophar, but I desire to speak to the Almighty and to argue my case to God. Now, this is an important moment for Job, because before, Job had said, there's no point. If I try, God terrifies me. But now he has reached a deeper level of his faith that he has begun to imagine, well, maybe I can do this. So now, because he can imagine it, now he starts thinking, maybe I can do this. And so he starts to desire this outcome. I want to speak to God. I want to argue my case before God. You, he's talking to Zophar and his other two friends, you, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be silent, all of you. Shut up! That would be wisdom. Love that response. You want to be wise? Shut your mouth and simply listen to someone who knows what he's talking about because of what he has experienced and you have not. Verse 6, he says, hear my argument. Listen to the plea of my lips. And then he asks in verse 7, 8, and 9, will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Will you speak deceitfully for him? Will you show him partiality? Will you argue the case for God? Would it turn out well if he examined you? Could you deceive him as you might deceive other men? These questions are the questions of a disinterested faith, one that feels nothing. Okay? You can speak deceitfully, sure, or you can speak for God, sure. Doesn't matter which way you go, you're going to have to answer to God. God gives, God takes away. Doesn't matter what you do. But Job can no longer stay here. His life experiences have shown him something different. And so he continues. He says, God would surely rebuke you if you secretly showed partiality. Would not his splendor terrify you, just as it has me? Would not the dread of him fall on you? Verse 13, again he says, keep silent and let me now speak. Now he's actually saying this both to Job and to God. Job is saying this to his friends and to God. So Job is saying, Zophar, zip it. And God, at least let me speak. Verse 14, he says, why do I put myself in jeopardy and take my life in my hands? Basically, why am I going to do this? Well, because I've begun to imagine that there might be a result. And because I can imagine it, maybe I can bring it into existence. Verse 15, in most of our Bibles, reads something like this. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. That is a profound statement of faith for many. I'm going to challenge you here this week, because the actual Hebrew for verse 17 can be read a much different way. You could also read this Hebrew passage as such. God will kill me, and so I will not wait for him to speak. Job is saying, if I argue my case to God, God will certainly kill me when he shows up. So I'm not going to wait for him to show up. I'm going to argue my case. I have no hope of winning. I have no hope of other than when God does respond, I'm dead, but I'm going to do it anyway. Job hopes that even in death, he might get a chance to prove to God he is still blameless and upright. He believes that his own righteousness will protect him from God's wrath for at least a brief moment, so that he can share with God how he feels. Verse 16, he says, indeed, this will turn out to be my deliverance. Job is now desiring something more than simple death, a simple return to nothingness. Now he thinks that even though he may die and return to being nothing, at least he will get a chance to argue his case. And that chance is his deliverance. He says, for no godless man would dare come before the Lord. He's daring. And that should be a proof to his friends that he is a righteous man. So he says, listen carefully to my words. Let your ears take in what I say. Now that I have prepared my case, I know I will be vindicated. Job says, I've prepared my case. I know what I'm going to say. It's going to kill me, but I'm going to do it. Can anyone bring charges against me? Again, that's written in such a way as to express the expected answer is no. No one can bring a charge against Job, not even God. If so, I will be silent and die. Only grant me these two things, O God, and then I will not hide from you. Withdraw your hand far from me, and stop frightening me with all of your terrors. Then summon me, and I will answer, or let me speak, and you can reply. Job says, God, let's have a discussion. Let's sit down in a timeout, and let's talk things through. If you will just leave me alone, just for a moment, and I might have a little strength to speak. Job continues in verse 23. How many wrongs and sins have I committed? Well, what has Job been saying all along? I haven't done anything wrong. Show me my offense and my sin. Why do you hide your face? Now, he's talking to God, not his friends, his God. Why, God, are you hiding from me? If I'm guilty, and that's why I am suffering, where are you, God? Show up, finish the job. But God, you're hiding because you know I haven't done anything wrong. So this is a challenge to God. I consider you, God, my enemy. How many times do we feel like that? We feel oppressed, we feel shame, and we think God has become our enemy. We are an enemy to God. He says, will you torment a windblown leaf? Will you chase after dry chaff? For you write down the bitter things against me and make me inherit the sins of my youth. You fasten my feet in shackles. You keep close watch on all of my paths by putting marks on the soles of my feet. So man wastes away like something rotten, like a garment eaten by moths. Beginning of chapter 14, Job continues. Man born of woman is a few days and of full trouble. He springs up like a flower and withers away. Like a fleeting shadow, he does not endure. Do not fix your eye on such a one. Who can bring what is pure to the impure? Well, no one. Man's days are determined. You have decreed the number of his months and have set a limit that he cannot exceed. So look away from him and let him alone till he has put in his time as a hired man. In other words, from chapter 13 verses 25 through chapter 14 verse 6, Job asked these type of questions. He says, God, basically, why do you continue to even pay attention to us human beings? We're nothing more than a windblown leaf. We're dry chaff that is floating through the air and quickly disappears. Our days are few compared to you who are eternal. So why do you pay attention? And not only that, why do you trouble us when our life is so fleeting, when we have so few years to live? Why won't you just leave us alone? Verse 7, he says, at least there is hope for a tree. If it is cut down, it will sprout again, and its new shoots will not fail. Job says, the trees have it better than we do. Its roots may grow old in the ground and its stump die in the soil. Yet the scent of water, it will bud and put forth shoots like a plant. But man dies and is laid low. He breathes his last and is no more. So Job says, man, what can we do, God? Our days are few and they're full of trouble. And then we die. And there's no return. Jumping down to verse 13, Job says, if only you would hide me in the grave and conceal me till your anger has passed. Job says, God, you've been hiding from me, so now let me hide from you, at least until your anger is past. Then at least I will be safe, I will be calm, I won't feel any pain, I won't feel anything at all. For if a man dies, will he live again? The answer is no, according to Job. All the days of my hard service I will wait for my renewal to come. What is his renewal? What is his hope of deliverance? That right before he dies, he will have enough strength to challenge and accuse God of injustice. I will wait for my renewal to come. You will call, I will answer you. Ironically, later on in the story, we will find that when God does show up, when God does call Job to respond, it is Job who is silent. He says, surely then you will count my steps, but not keep track of my sin. Why won't God keep track of Job's sin then? Because Job will be dead. He will be nothing. There will be no point in keeping track of something that isn't there. My offenses will be sealed up in a bag, and you will cover over my sin. But as a mountain erodes and crumbles, and as a rock is moved from place, as water wears away stones and torrents wash away the soil, so you destroy the hope of men. And what is Job's hope at the moment? His hope is that he can speak before God destroys him. He says, you destroy man's hope. You don't even let us speak. You don't even let us argue our case before you. You overpower him once and for all, and he's gone. Poof. You change his countenance and send him away. If his sons are honored, he doesn't know it. If they are brought low, he doesn't see it. Again, that's a very ecclesiastic understanding of life. The author of Ecclesiastes comes to the same conclusion, that no matter what we have done in this life, when we die, that's it. We have no more recollection, no more control over what happens in the living world. Job concludes, he feels but the pain of his own body and mourns only for himself. He's left alone. And that's where Job ends his argument with his friend Zophar. The importance of this interacting discussion between Job and Zophar is that Job realizes he cannot maintain a disinterested faith, one that simply continues to believe God gives, God takes away. Well, blessed be the name of the Lord. No, he says, I've got to be able to speak. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I've got to find a way. I'm starting to imagine that maybe I can. If God will just leave me alone for a moment, if God will shut up, if God will take his hands from me just for a few minutes, I'll be able to speak my case and show God I have not sinned. I do not need to repent. I am an upright man. And then God will, poof, take me out. He'll destroy me. Now, that's where Job is at this moment in the story. That's not where he will remain. As the story progresses, Job will continue to change. We'll find out how in our next session. God bless.